Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or wherever you're all tuning in from. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Jim Gans. I am the Senior Curator of Photographs at the J. Paul Getty Museum here in Los Angeles, and I'm delighted to be hosting a conversation with Duane Michals and Arthur Tress. I'd like to take a few moments to tell you about the two photographers. But first, I would like to mention that if you have questions for Arthur and Duane, you may put them in the Q&A feature on the Zoom webinar, which I think is a button you'll find at the bottom of your screen. So please use the Q&A to post questions, and we'll keep an eye on that. And then at the end of our talk this afternoon, we'll give you more opportunities to ask the two artists questions. So let me just tell you a few things about Duane and Arthur. Duane Michals is a very influential American photographer renowned for his innovative approach to visual storytelling. Starting in the 1960s, he began capturing intimate and often surreal images that transcended traditional photographic conventions. He gained widespread recognition for his narrative sequences, which combine handwritten text with sequential imagery, encouraging viewers to engage with photography as a medium of storytelling. His work often explores themes of identity, mortality, and the subconscious, inviting viewers to ponder the complexities of human existence. His work is in museums around the world and has been the subject of numerous exhibitions and books, including a large retrospective at the Carnegie Museum of Art and the Peabody Essex Museum in 2015. And Arthur Tress is best known for his surreal and imaginative imagery, which is partly the subject of our current exhibition at the Getty Center, Arthur Tress Rambles, Dreams, and Shadows, on view through February 18th. Throughout his career, Arthur has explored themes of dreams, fantasies, and the subconscious, and has established himself as one of the foremost proponents of magic realism. His work has been the subject of many books and exhibitions and is represented in major museum collections around the world. Now, Arthur traveled extensively when he was in his 20s, finally landing back in his native New York in 1968. That's where he worked for many years until he moved to the West Coast to Cambria, California in 1992, and then 2009 to San Francisco, where he lives and works today. Arthur and Duane have had long and varied and fascinating careers, and as we will see, their work has a great deal in common. This morning, we're going to be focusing on the period of the late 1960s to the mid-70s, when they both began creating staged storytelling photographs that prefigure so much of what photography is about today. And at the end, we will have them talk about their current work. So I'd like to invite Duane and Arthur to join us, please. Turn on your video and unmute yourselves. And I see Duane and I see Arthur. There we all are. Welcome, gentlemen. So I'm here in LA. Arthur is joining us from his home in San Francisco, and Duane from New York City. Great to have you with us. How are you doing today?
Well, blood pressure is 12, and my heart rate is 1/1, and that whole gas problem has gone away by itself.
That's awesome. Okay.
No, it's an unusually sunny day here in San Francisco, and I'm looking forward to going out shooting later this afternoon.
Okay, great. So give me a moment to share my PowerPoint. And I believe that's working properly, but Greg will let me know if that's not the case. You can see my PowerPoint, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Well, I thought it would be fun to start with, to sort of turn the clock back to 1975 when you were both apparently playing some sports. This was actually Mike Mandel's work. Mike is a conceptual artist who uses photography, who's originally from LA, studied at the San Francisco Art Institute, I believe. And in 1975, he made a series of 134 baseball cards of photographers and curators, which he self-published, and sold them in packs of 10 with Topps bubble gum. And I guess for $1, you could get 10 of them and you could trade them. And they featured a kind of who's who of the photo world from the mid 1970s. Everyone from Ansel Adams to Imogen Cunningham to Ed Ruscha and John Charkowski. And you see Arthur's and Dwayne's cards. And I don't know if everybody can read everything that's written there on the back of the cards, but Dwayne indicates that his favorite camera is a Nikon. His favorite photographer is Robert Frank. And he writes, in high school, I formed the McKeesport Greyhounds softball. I got to play first base because I formed the team. We were terrible. Arthur, you note that your favorite camera is the Hasselblad. Your favorite developer is Accufine. Your favorite paper is Ply Contrast F. Your favorite film is Plus X. And your favorite photographer, Dwayne Michaels. And you wrote, I was never really good at baseball. I was too nearsighted to be a good batter, too timid to be a catcher, and too afraid of the pop-ups to be trusted in left field. There were no other positions for me to play, and that's why I became a photographer. Do you guys remember posing for Mike Mandel?
I do, because I live around the corner from Gramercy Park, and we just went around the corner, and luckily I was wearing my jock strap, so I was in the zone for being a baseball player, and that's all I remember.
How about you, Arthur?
Oh, okay. Yes, it's very interesting that it was kind of unusual that photography by 1975, we already had a kind of group of all-stars, kind of interest in photography as fine art kind of blossomed with, starting in the 70s. And of course, Mike Mandel meant this as a kind of humorous take on American kitsch cards, but it was quite a brilliant idea for him to do something like this.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the next slide, which gives us an opportunity to take a look at some of Dwayne's earliest work, and in particular, two of your early muses, and that would be Atget, Eugène Atget on the left, and René Magritte, who you actually got to meet. You visited him, I think, in August of 1965 in Brussels when you were 33 and he was 65. Your thoughts about Atget and Magritte?
Yeah,
Right.
well, I discovered Atget. First of all, you have to understand the photo world was not as ubiquitous as it is today. And I never having gone to photography school, I did all my discoveries on my own. And when I discovered Atget, I was completely thrilled by him, because all those interiors and exteriors in Paris at the turn of the century looked very much like stage sets to me. And then I began to do my version of Empty New York, which is a version of Atget. And I would get up very early on the Sunday morning because it's hard to find New York empty. And I would put my camera up against the glass of this at the barbershop. You could see me way in the back. You could see my silhouette. But the importance of this photograph is that if you look also in the back on the left, you'll see a white jacket hanging on a hook by a mirror. And when I saw that, I thought, the barber comes in and that's his barber costume. And then he does his barber act. And I began to see this as a stage set. This was his stage set. And it fed into my beginning to see everything as theater and drama. And all of these locations became stage sets. And it was just a matter of me peopling my own stage set that was very important. And Magritte, in 1960, I looked into a copy of Harper's Bazaar, and I saw this full-page photograph of what I thought was a nude woman, and she was holding a mirror in front of her, but she was also in the mirror simultaneously, which was impossible. She could not be behind the mirror and in the mirror. And then I realized that was actually a painting and not a photograph, and that's the first time I had seen Magritte. But I love the idea of the contradiction. I'm so happy he made me stop and think and question and just not respond with my knee jerk. He made me reevaluate and reconsider what was happening. And then I realized I could apply those same principles to photography.
When you photographed Magritte, was it a kind of collaboration in terms of how these images came about?
No, Magritte was amazingly kind and generous. No, he waited for me to tell him what to do. He had no idea what the double exposures were about, but he was quite willing to participate in the way that he would do whatever I wanted him to do. And how generous is that? But he was always the point of departure for me, and he still is to this day.
So Dwayne's probably best known for his sequences, which often include text. What you're seeing on the screen is a sequence called "The Spirit Leaves the Body," which I think is one of the earliest. And across the top, you see all of the images, and then I've just blown two of them up so that people can actually get a better idea of what's going on here. I mean, this was definitely work that nobody else was doing. I mean, this is pretty groundbreaking in 1968, and I know, Arthur, you were aware of Dwayne pretty early on, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, Arthur, how you became aware of Dwayne and what this photograph in particular, how it inspired you.
Well, I think around 1970, Dwayne had a show at MoMA, and this might have been one of the sequences in that show. And I saw it there, and Dwayne kind of acted like, I would say, a mental can opener to show what possibilities of photography, to show things that are not seen, that are hidden, and ask very surprising questions, inquiries. I can quote, this is from Dwayne. I had written it down in my notebook. People don't examine their lives as events. What is time? What is disappointment? How do you photograph chance or death? And so I think Dwayne was unique in showing that photography could show us your interior life. And that was as important a subject matter as photographing people on the subway or out in the street. And that was a very radical position to take in those early 1970 years. And I think and there were other photographers, Jerry Ulisman, Clarence John Lawton, also trying to explore these personal visions and interior states, but using the realistic apparatus of a photograph to convey that feelings.
Dwayne, any thoughts about this particular sequence?
Yes, but in principle, photographers photograph things the traditional photographer is an observer to photograph transient facts that he encounters in life. And if the facts are comforting, or the facts fit into the photographic idea of what a picture is, they're comforting because they're familiar. But I maintain that you become the artist, and I don't even like that word. I'm going to call it fartist. You become a fartist when you bring insight into what you photograph. It's one thing to show a woman crying, but then how do you say, why is she crying? What is the nature of grief? So then you have to invent, it's a new way of expressing that. The key word is expression, and it's the same thing with gay issues, where Maple thought gay guys love gay anatomy, but they don't bring any insight into the relationship with the person in the photograph. So then you have to invent a new way of expressing that. And I did it simply by doing the moment before and the moment after the decisive moment. But also there's a great, what with this liberation, the freedom to expand how you view the world with the camera, comes a huge responsibility, because it's much more difficult. You have to figure out, I hope, it's not about finding somebody crossing the street and sticking their tongue at you. That's a photograph. But I'm not saying this well. All I want to say is that you have to go beyond description and bring insight and expression to what you're photographing. That's all I know.
I want to say something too. This particular sequence, or the whole idea of sequences, inspired me to do my book Shadow, which is called A Novel in Photographs. It's 100 images in a sequence. It's kind of a dream journey.
Yes.
And it very distinctly related to Duane's opening up the possibility of the narrative play of an extended sequence. And nobody else had done that before.
I'd like to take a minute just to sort of tell people a little bit about what the photo world really looked like in, say, 1970, because it was pretty small. I mean, New York was certainly kind of the center of it, I think, already. And Arthur, when you arrived in New York, back in New York after your years of travel, one of the first things you did, which I thought was really quite extraordinary, is that you wrote a gallery guide for this British magazine called Creative Camera, where you basically went around to all of the major venues for photography, and you wrote a kind of review and description of all of them. And there were lots of quirky places where photographs were shown, but one of the most important venues was this place called the Underground Gallery. So for your article, Arthur, you also photographed all of these places, and although they didn't actually run the photographs in the magazine. And these are some shots of the Underground Gallery, which was located on East 10th Street in the East Village. It was opened in 1963, and it was this sort of 40-foot long kind of corridor space that connected to an apartment that was owned by Norbert Kleber, who ran this place. And in your article, Arthur, you wrote this about it. You said, because of the gallery's high expenses, the photographer must pay a hanging fee of $25 plus $25 electricity per monthly show. He must also pay for his own publicity and mailing costs. At each exhibition, prints are for sale for about $25, 1/3 going to the gallery and 2/3 to the photographer. And Duane actually had a couple of exhibitions at the Underground Gallery. I think it was one of the first places that showed your work, Duane, and I think you also showed in group shows there. I assume you both remember Norbert and the Underground Gallery as a kind of exciting venue.
Well, Norbert was amazing because there were no real galleries other than Helen G. And before that, a guy named Larry Siegel tried to open a gallery, but he was completely inept. And he had about 2 exhibits, and I think I was in both of them. And then suddenly Norbert appears, and he owned a company called PhotoCare. As I said, he was from Switzerland, and he lived in the back room, and the gallery was actually the hallway leading to his back room in the basement. It was all very homemade, but it was thrilling to have a legitimate venue outside of the MoMA's power grip on what photography could be. And it gave other photographers a location. They didn't need the imprimatur of Zarkowski to be seen. And this is extremely liberating and very important. And most people don't know anything about this period in early photography.
And that's Norbert actually in those views on the left, standing there by the wall, right?
Yes, and I'm sure he didn't make a penny, and he had these people coming and going all the time in his apartment. He's one of the early heroes of photography that nobody knows about.
Arthur, you remember seeing shows there?
Oh, yes, he had a Christmas show, and I brought a Bruce Davidson of a horse in Wales. It's quite a famous image. It was $15. So one really couldn't earn a living from sales of photography, but it was, there was a big discussion even at this time, is photography art? Should it be shown at galleries, you know? And it seems kind of passé now, but people were really concerned about that. And it was pioneers like Norbert, or the man who founded ICP, who kind of broke the rules for a lot of these places. But there was also a kind of smaller venues. Most photography labs had galleries. And my first show of The Dream Collector was at the Raffi Photo Lab, or I showed some of my early Appalachia work at the Sierra Club Gallery. So there were smaller venues stuck all over town. And it was also the first time that the New York Times actually, and the Village Voice, began doing reviews of photography shows. And that was very important.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they actually, like Norbert's shows were reviewed in the New York Times at the Underground Gallery. Well, speaking of the the elephant in the room, I guess, I mean, MoMA was, of course, a very important place for photography. John Charkowski was the curator in charge of the photography department. So, Dwayne, two great things happened for you around the same time. One is that you published your book of sequences, which is we see on the left, and on the right is just part of a press release for the show Stories, which was in, I think, the small gallery at MoMA in New York. So these are both kind of major turning points for you, yes?
Now, that was a banner year. What happened was I had a portfolio in Swiss Camera, which was probably the most respected photo magazine in the world. And the camera, they did a fold out. So the sequences appeared across 3 pages. And then I guess MoMA saw it. And Peter Bonnell was the reason I had the exhibit. He was the assistant there at that time. And I was an anathema to Zarkowski, because I called Zarkowski the Louis B. Mayer of photography, and MoMA was the MGM, not the MOM. And the fact I got seen there was quite startling. So that was a very big year. And people really looked. I mean, they're the only places to see work. But as a photographer, I take pictures, and then they get published. But I don't realize that a lot of people see them. So once a photograph gets out in the magazine or in a book, it has a life of its own that reverberates. And at that point, I'm on to something else. And Arthur knows the very same process. But this was all extremely liberating and a banner year for me, if I could say that.
So,
Yes.
Arthur,
Peter Burnell was a gay man, but he also gave a show at MoMA to Jerry Ulisman. So he was trying to push the edges of what was acceptable in photography. He then went over to Princeton Museum, but he was really a very nice person. And so I think what was kind of sinister about MoMA and Charkowski is that he kind of controlled who got Guggenheims. And so if you would see the list of photographers who got grants from the Guggenheim Foundation, they were often photographers who had recently showed at the MoMA and did this kind of Erstadt street style, which was kind of abstract street photography. I never could understand really what its purpose was. But anyway.
I wanted to bring up these two images to sort of get you both talking about this, there's obviously a shared gay sensibility in your work, and a kind of, I guess at the time, a subtext, because it wasn't really possible to be, openly gay in photography, I guess, in 1970. And Dwayne, your chance meeting is an important piece that is sometimes discussed in the context of a kind of, queer subtext. And of course, Arthur, you started shooting in the Ramble in Central Park shortly after you moving back to New York, but these were pictures that you did not exhibit or publish at the time, right?
Yes, no, that's true.
Well, chance meeting, when I did it, I didn't think of it specifically as being a gay event, which it is, of course, but it was not. I was more interested in the concept of chance and people passing each other a moment that never happened or that happened too late. I thought that was a very interesting concept. But I never photographed the gay community. I never went to the Rambles. I never went to, because I had a long time relationship and I simply wasn't part of that generation. I certainly dealt with gay issues, but not as venues or gays playing dress up. It was always about it, but not about the costumes and the artifacts. It was more about the drama and the tension of the gay world rather than what tattoos look like, or words to that effect.
Oh, okay. Well, again, Dwayne, he often used the male nude, even in Journey of the Spirit. It's a male nude. And these, it's not a man and a woman passing each other on a ski slope, and giving each other a quick look. It's two men. So I think Dwayne's work has always had that subtext of a kind of homoerotic sensibility. Dwayne loves Walt Whitman. He's done books called Love and Lust, and trying to explore those areas of gay feeling in a very intimate way. But in 1960s, I was still very much a kind of documentary photographer. And so I did gay parades and etc. My sister was a well-known gay activist, and there's a documentary film about her. And so she was part of a trial, the Pink Scare in Washington, D.C. So being openly gay was really part of my family's tradition in a way. What's interesting about this particular, I lived at 72nd and Riverside, and so Central Park was just 2 blocks away from my house. And I'd spend time in the Rambles cruising and trying to meet guys. It was always a very frustrating experience, but I just began bringing my camera with me. I'd photograph other parts of Central Park, people boating or playing baseball, and then I'd kind of retreat to the Rambles and start doing, and I just couldn't photograph people candidly. I'd always ask, and actually this is a staged photograph, which is kind of interesting. It was kind of an early, so I had to get their permission. I kind of move them around, and in a certain sense, it has the aura of a documentary photograph, but in a sense, it's a projection of my own feelings of insecurity, of guilt, anxiety, projected onto these gay men who were willing models and kind of understood what I was trying to project in the picture.
Arthur, I just thought of something. If I had taken that photograph, I would have had the guy below start coming in 6 pictures, come through that arch. And at the very same moment, the guy on top decides to commit suicide and jumps, and he lands on him. And then the guy below gets killed, but the guy on top survives. I think that's funny.
That's a good, well, the bridge is still there, Dwayne. You
Okay.
can have another chance.
Woo.
Think about that. So Arthur, as you were working on your series Open Space in the Inner City, where you were sort of documenting problems about sort of urban life in New York, one of the things you often did is you kind of photographed kids in these kind of remote locations, or kids kind of on the fringes of society. Similar theme in a way. And that project took you to Newark, where the race riots had happened a year before, and you found some kids sort of playing in one of these abandoned buildings, which you photographed. But those open space images of kids, then some of them turn up again in the Dream Collector. I mean, the two projects kind of overlap and coexist. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, the Boy in Burnt Out Furniture Store was kind of a breaking point for me, where I kind of entered a new way of thinking about photography, where what's real and what's illusionary. I went to high school in Coney Island, where I began my first photography, and the old freak shows had these wonderful giant orange paintings, carnival paintings. And it's the painting in the furniture store was very similar. And it was on the floor, and I lifted it up, and I asked the boy just spontaneously to put his arm up against the sofa. And what was wonderful about working with kids, they understand that moment when the real becomes fantasy. And so it's very easy to work with them. And so this photo kind of became a portal to my future work.
I love this photograph.
Dwayne, that
Arthur.
was Dwayne, that was a photograph that I think you were aware of pretty early on, right?
That's probably the first one I remember that of Arthur's where I looked to see who had taken it. But I like it for so many reasons. One, of course, is the theatricality of it and the fake and the tragedy of it. The stage set, the little boy lost. It's just a very important photograph, because this is where he took documentary one step forward and began to seek out environments that were not just, it's not like photographing another development in outside of Albuquerque or outside of Phoenix, where you see a lot of row houses. I mean, this photograph demands your attention. Those row houses, once you've seen them all, you've seen them all. We're worth that. Anyway, but this is, and I found this very intriguing, and it was a promise that Arthur well kept based on this photograph.
So Dwayne, I think you're sort of alluding to like the new topographics. So I think it's actually very interesting to situate the work that both of you were doing in this sort of moment in the early to mid 1970s. New topographics photographs of a man-altered landscape was this really important show at George Eastman House in 1978 that had artists like Robert Adams and Louis Baltz and Stephen Shore. Some wonderful, wonderful work, but it was really focused on these very sort of intentionally banal and desolate images of suburban sprawl and industrial sites and so forth. At the same time, at the exact same time, Alan Coleman, A.D. Coleman, who was a great photography critic for the Village Voice and also wrote for the New York Times and was really, I think, sympathetic and sensitive to the work that both of you were doing, and was a particular fan, I think, of Arthur's. A.D. Coleman wrote a very important article in Artforum in 1976, September 1976, called "The Directorial Mode: Notes Toward a Definition," where he really spelled out the difference between straight photography and staged photography. And one of my favorite parts of that article is where he quotes Les Krims, who had said in 1969, and quoting Krims, "I am not a historian, I create history. It is possible to create any image one thinks of. This possibility, of course, is contingent on being able to think and create. The greatest potential source of photographic imagery is the mind." It's a fascinating and wonderful statement, and very current, actually, in terms of what people are now doing with AI. But Coleman said that Les Krims and Duane Michals, quoting Coleman, "must certainly be counted among the pioneers of their generation in this form. Both are prolific, both have published and exhibited widely, both are reference points for the current generation of younger photographers." So you were both really working in this kind of directorial mode, and not, the other end of the spectrum from new topographics. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, I keep saying what's interesting. Why do I say that? That's interesting. Anyway, what's curious is that the whole photo world had this tradition, and justly so, of reportage, of documentary, and that's the role that photographs always played. And the kind of the directorial mode, I just thought of, I would have called it the porn move erectorial mode. Never mind. But there were no champions. It was just beginning to become taken seriously as another alternative to walking around with the street with the camera, hoping to find life, or documenting facts and then moving on. So this was the beginning, which was happening simultaneously by the kind of inquiries, the direction I had taken, and then Les and Arthur, we were ships in the night. I don't mean that. We weren't ships. We were battleships. Sorry, I enjoyed that. Next.
Arthur?
Well, I think what you can sense I think a lot of Duane work takes place in small rooms, quite often in his own house. But I guess because of my tradition of documentary photography and the way I like walking around, actually, but I have a sort of sensitivity to what Duane had in his early work, the incipient strangeness of the world. And I had someone asked me around 1970 to do a workshop with children, getting them to express with photographs through their dreams. It was done in a New York City public school. And I said, well, this would make a wonderful idea for a photo book, for a photo project. And I began writing down all kinds of dreams, etc. And I had, my early work in the 60s was ethnographical. I'd spent times in Africa and India, photographing ethnographical tribal groups whose world vision is very mystical. You might call it magic realism. They're rituals and ceremonies. There's a great flux of time and space. Also, the bride and groom, New York City in the early 70s was a wonderful explosion of avant-garde theater done on the cheap, often after midnight. And the model is Stefan Brecht, the son of Bertolt Brecht. And this was a costume from the Grand Tarot, which was a play done by the theater company of the Ridiculous. And we were just walking down the street from his house, and I came upon a burnt out church, and we just went in and we did this picture. But I wanted it, the pose is very reminiscent of Buddhist statues. But again, I just improvise out of the accidental. I find that's a very important ingredient to my work. And
Both of these amazing photographs were taken in locations that you basically just kind of stumbled on.
yes,
And in the case of the photograph on the left, the child is, again, not a hired model, but he's just a kid that's playing, and then you're just kind of directing him to pose for the photograph.
but you might say it's accidental, but there's a great deal of synchronicity involved. I'm bringing myself to these very unusual places. Or I often think that people who have accompanied me while I'm walking around, and just things just seem to happen, fall out of the sky. And, it's kind of amazing. I think there are these events that are going on around us all the time that we just miss, that if you point your camera at, it can be extraordinary.
I'd like to move on to oh, sorry, Dwayne.
No, that's okay.
I wanted to move on to Theater of the Mind, another one of your photo books, Arthur, where Bride and Groom appeared. And what we have on the screen here at the left is Dwayne's original typescript or manuscript for his little essay in Theater of the Mind called Tress's Vaudeville. And he says in here, and I realize people probably won't be able to make this out, but my favorite quote from this little essay is where, Dwayne, you say, "If Arthur Tress comes to photograph you, beware. Do not be taken in by that innocent smile and shy demeanor. They are his disguises. Arthur sees rather than looks, and he will see your secrets. Don't be surprised if Arthur suddenly asks you to put your mother in a wheelbarrow for the photo. Don't be amazed when you find yourself doing it." And I have to say, Arthur has photographed me a couple of times, and I know Arthur very well. And when he's behind the camera, he is kind of a different person. He's very specific about what he wants. He sees in his brain what he wants, and he really kind of directs you. And you do find yourself doing things that you weren't you weren't expecting to do.
Yes.
I particularly love the kitchen portrait he did in some suburban house where the father is at a kitchen table of some sort, and he's got his daughter's head on the table, and he's got a knife or something. He's going to chop her head off, which is funny, but also very scary, beautifully scary.
Okay. Yes.
And that's a photograph that's in the exhibition and has garnered a lot of conversation about, depicting dysfunctional family relationships and domestic violence. And I think, Arthur, that was a photograph where, the father was actually a student of yours taking a photo workshop, I think in Bermuda or somewhere, or Martha's Vineyard. And
Yes.
you would sort of go into the home and kind of improvise, right?
Yes, but I'm coming from a background really of film noir, and I lived in Sweden for about a year, and I read all the plays of Strindberg, and where Strindberg did a play called Drum Speller, Dream Play, and it's the aggressiveness of family relationships. It was a great revelation in the late 19th century, how skewed male-female relationships were. And so I'm almost making a social comment sometimes on the violence of my photographs. But I do also have to say, you know, there was sort of a New York style of photography that was a little aggressive and satiric. Diane Arbus, Avedon, you know, we were taking uncomfortable views, sort of challenging the family of man point of view very much of what human people were. And so I think it was a very tough kind of photography, but
So there are a few cases where you both photographed the same model, and in particular, this was a man named Elmer Klein, who was I think he was a playwright and a poet and a sometime actor. I don't know who discovered him first. I think it might have been Arthur. That's Elmer on the left as Father Time, and on the right, photographed by Duane. You remember?
Arthur,
Mhm.
I was doing a book on the great Greek poet Cavafy, and it's certainly he was a great gay poet, and my book was the gay book, but it was not about leather and all of that. It was about the quiet moments of desperation that people lead when, like this fellow, in my mind, was, you know, a mature, grown-up man, and he's looking at a picture of himself when he was a young man, and now there he is as an old man, and he's living with this cat, and it's so poignant. It's a thing that certainly gay people don't want to know about or pretty much ignore. And what I wrote was, when he was a young man, it seemed impossible that he would ever grow old. And now that he is an old man, he cannot remember ever having been young. And the bonus, of course, was the cat looking in the into the camera and with a phallic tail. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
well, Elmer was a friend of mine. He lived in a hotel at 73rd Street and Central Park West. He was a playwright and poet. I met him through Tom O'Horgan, who was also part of the New York kind of underground theater world. And Elmer really was kind of funny, and he was always available to do a shoot. So we'd go out about once a week, walk around the city, and again, just improvise situations. And I had intended to make a book of them, and I did. It's called Elmer Over Time. And as Duane's piece is also about time passing, but my photograph, it was, I'd come over to we were in Sag Harbor, and we passed an old antique store, and the kind lady of the antique store let me borrow some of the props, you know, the scythe, the blanket, the clock, and just do this improvised setting. So it was just the kind of way I liked working the best.
So you both also treated autobiographical. I mean, a lot of your work is autobiographical, even when it's.
Oh, I would like to say, Duane was someone who really exploded the idea that photographers should be able to write with their photographs. That really was kind of unbelievable no-no. And so later on, I said, well, he inspired me to do some writing with my own work for Teapot Opera, Fish Tank Sonata, and other pieces. But it was an extraordinary thing. And then Duane has a book just of his writings. And somehow photographers were seen just as eyeballs, that they didn't have minds and emotions that could be put down in words. And Dwayne is an excellent writer.
And often combine, puts the text with the photograph, as in a letter from your father.
But what's interesting, I said it again, it's not so interesting to say what's interesting all the time. What's not interesting all the time is that language has always been associated with photographs. You pick up the New York Times and there's a picture of Donald Trump falling down a flight of steps on an airplane. It says Donald Trump fell down the flight of steps on was pushed down a flight of steps, getting off of number one, and he did number one and number two, and he landed. But you look at the picture, it tells you what you're looking at. So there's nothing new about writing with photographs. I was news editor of the high school paper, who, what, why, no, and where, or something. So you could look at this picture forever of my mother, my father, and my brother. You have no idea that they didn't like each other, that she got married because she was knocked up. And this is a true story. When I went to school in Colorado from Pittsburgh, my dad said, I'm going to write you a letter. And he never wrote the letter. And then I began to joke with him, when are you going to write the goddamn letter? And he never did. And so this is a fact. And so I don't care what they look like, what you don't care what they look like. But what I do care about is what I wrote where the photograph failed, and I had to supplement the photograph by writing about the truth. The truth was not in looking at them. The truth is in the text.
Dwayne, would you like to read the text for people that can't?
Well, no, I can read it, sure. As long as I can remember, my father told me that one day he would write me a very special letter, but he never mentioned what the letter would be about. And I used to try to speculate about what great secret the letter would reveal, what surprise, what intimacy we would share. I know what I had hoped to read in the letter. I hope what the letter would contain. I wanted him to tell me where he had hidden his affections, but then he died, and the letter never did arrive, and I never found that place where he had hidden his love. Fact, true fact.
Arthur, your dad was really supportive of your career, and I think you had a really kind of close relationship with him, and you
Yes. My mother was kind of a typical Jewish woman of her generation, and she didn't really get myself or my lesbian sister for sure. My father was a little bit more bohemian and had lots of theater friends, but also during my childhood, he was very sick many times. He had TB and was going to sanatoriums. So it sort of built in a kind of insecurity in my world. He lived at 77th and Riverside. I lived at 72nd. And this is a chair from my studio that I would sit in and look out the window. And then I moved it into the park and asked him to come down and sit in it during this snowstorm. And he modeled for me in several other photos. But again, I think it's a picture on reflecting probably my fear of losing him as a source of comfort and security, but also it becomes a kind of an image of death. James Joyce wrote a short story about the snow in Dublin falling, and it's emotionally resonant with a lot of people, I find.
So you have photographed each other over the years, and I think your relationship is, you still are friends, even though you live on different coasts. How has your relationship changed, I wonder? I think in the beginning, Dwayne, you really were a kind of mentor for Arthur, and I guess you are still an inspiration. Yes.
Well, Arthur's evolved as he's matured as an artist. I may have in the beginning been there the way maybe Magritte was for me, where he there was when you're out there whistling in the dark, it's nice to hear somebody else whistling, even not whistling your exact same tune. And so but he just fulfilled all his possibilities, and it's a great pleasure for me, because I always felt pretty much like a voice in the wilderness, and Arthur was we were two voices humming a version of the same tune. And look at him now. I mean, he's fantastic. I'm thrilled by it. Anyway, blah blah blah. I'm going to get weepy.
That's sweet. One thing, Dwayne and I would try to connect about once a month in New York, and he's a busy guy. And so, but he always managed to find time for me to come to his studio, and he liked showing me his new work, and we both love art books very much. So some of his new acquisitions, but I think, and the portrait that I was I had found an abandoned hospital on Roosevelt Island, and I was doing room-side painted sculptures out of the old hospital equipment. And then Dwayne came in one day, and I asked him to do a portrait of me. And it's a brilliant portrait. I mean, it's just improvised out of some of the elements of one of the sculptures I was working on, with all the sculptures, the circles, and it's really a genius image. And one thing about nice, now that I live on the West Coast, of course, when I try to visit Dwayne, when I come to New York, but about once every 6 weeks, I get a phone call from Dwayne, and he wants to know how I'm doing, what's up. I'm so glad you're fine and functioning, which is unusual. Most photographers, especially, don't share or feelings for each other that are not competitive. And so I think that's very sweet.
There's one point I want to make, and that is that the art world is filled with all these artists who are throwing paint on the wall, and projects destined to make the big bucks, eventually Larry Gagosian. And Arthur, if you haven't seen this work, the paintings he did in that falling down hospital, you're in for a major treat. He's a very good painter, and this work is very exciting. I can't wait, so all those people running around throwing paint everywhere, and this guy walks over there, and his authenticity is my favorite word. All these artist wannabes are not authentic. They have career goals to fill. Arthur invents, but look forward to seeing his new book on the paintings inside the mental hospital. How appropriate.
I want
That's
to.
all.
I just want to say we're getting near the end of the PowerPoint, and at the very end, I'm going to ask you each to talk about the work that you're doing today. We're going to view one of Dwayne's films, and then I've got a lot of questions people have submitted, and we'll come back at the end and answer questions for folks. But Arthur, you still photograph every single day, I know, and you were here in LA for the opening of your exhibition at the Getty, and this is one of the photographs you took.
Yes, around 2000. Around 1998, I began doing very elaborate paper sculptures. I would take photographs and bend them and sculpt them and paint them, and made giant spaceships and things. And then I said to myself, what do I do? I was 70, and what do I do for an encore? And I said, I'm just going to go back to simple seeing, a little bit going against, and then see what happens in the next 10, 20, 30 years, maybe. And again, that word incipient strangeness of the world, you know, I began experimenting with different formats, round photographs, and then I just got hooked on this diamond shaped and photographing buildings, which I've been doing for the last 10 years. You know, Cocteau said, as you get older, sometimes there's a kind of arthritis of the imagination. But
That
but
has
yeah,
not affected either one of you at all.
no, but and I love Bauhaus kind of photography, but just you know, the strange Capitol records building in shape of a stack of records, this strange mural seen from a parking lot, that, you know, half dead palm tree in the background, the strange telephone poles. I mean, is it there, or did I make it up out of my own mind? You know, and
Well, I'm really inspired by both of you, and the fact that you're both so energetic and so inspired by what you're doing. When I visited Dwayne in New York City last spring, you sat me down because you were so excited to show me the films that you're making today, and there was just such joy in sharing the brand new work with me. So Dwayne, you really kind of turned your attention to filmmaking, I think around 2018, and you said to me that you think that the mini film is, quote, the blossoming and ultimate destination of photography.
Oh, I still do. I think that the great era of still photography is finished, and a great shift has taken place. And that is that my principle is I don't admire what I can do, but I admire what I can't do. And that's why I like trapeze artists for so many reasons. But you'll never get me floating midair and letting go. But I'll let go on the ground. So I evolved very naturally to making films. Everybody has a cell phone now. Everybody makes their own little pictures. The mystique of being the Ansel Adams or that kind of thing, or also spend your whole life walking around looking for something. The film is the next logical direction. I have a lot of help now. We have done, that is Josiah Cuneo and Tim Soder. We have done 75 films. I make a film every 5 minutes. I have no pretension to Hollywood. Somebody gave me $1 million, I'd make a movie, sure. But these films are the future of photography. And they're much harder to do because it's not just photographing your mother-in-law's birthday party. It's you can liberate yourself to photographing your dream. I mean, it's fantastic. Garbo speaks, and now I won't shut up. But and I can't wait to see what we're going to do next week. And you
Yeah.
have a film here.
We do.
Well,
So
this was an early one. I did, and then Arthur happened to stop by, so I said, "Get in the movie. You'll see him."
So watch for Arthur's cameo. All of Dwayne's films are on Vimeo. Anybody can see them. But we're going to show Zip Zap Zip. Now this film is about 3.5 minutes long. So enjoy the film, and then afterwards we'll come back and answer some questions for the audience. So we can cue the film.
I am speaking this sentence. This is the sentence that I am speaking. The sentence says, this is the sentence that I am speaking. I have it written down upstairs. I'll go upstairs and find it. I'll go upstairs and find it is another sentence I have spoken. I am thinking. I am thinking is something that I just thought. I am not thinking, but I am still speaking. I will think. Zip, zip, zap. I spoke about zip, zap. Zip, zap, zip is happening. Who knows what evil lurks in the zip, zap, zip? I am thinking. I am not zip, zap, zipping. This was a thought that I was thinking. I am no longer speaking. Zip, zip, zap. Zip, zap, zip.
Okay.
We'll let the credits play out, and I'm inviting Dwayne and Arthur to turn your cameras back on and unmute yourselves, please.
I wanted to make one comment on the film. I had a great friend.
Dwayne,
Sorry, we're trying to get the video back. It says the host has stopped it, so
Oh dear, okay.
thanks.
Hoping somebody can help us out.
There we go.
There's Dwayne. Arthur, can you turn your camera back on?
Is it on? Are we on?
You're on, Dwayne. Was there something you wanted to say?
I want to make one comment about the film.
Yes.
I had a great friend, Fred, and we were together for 57 years, and then he died. Anyway, so in his last years, he would say zip, zap, zip. And that's where the title came from. And that whole thing was done in my living room with stuff. And anyway, and I like it a lot. I don't know what it's about, but I think it's beautiful.
I like it a lot.
Thank you.
I like it a lot too. I want to convey a few quick questions, and there were so many questions that came in. I apologize. We're sort of running over, so we only have time for a couple of them. But several people have asked if this program will be available to see again later, and the answer is yes. It'll be on the Getty's YouTube channel. So if you missed part of it or you want to watch it again, you can watch it as many times as you want. We've had a couple of people ask if you both are still using film or if you've gone digital. I mean, Dwayne, you've really gone digital with your films, with your filmmaking. But Arthur, how about you? I think you're still using analog, right?
Yeah, for some reason, I just love the Hasselblad and black and white film. And it's just what I'm comfortable with and used to. And so I've become, I find it flexible enough for what I need to express. And So,
Okay.
but digital is wonderful for color, and if I do another color project, I may use that.
So with film, and we had another person ask about contact sheets. Hector
Yeah.
Perez wrote in, and he's a photography student at the City College of San Francisco. Says, do you guys think contact sheets still have a place and are strong storytelling tools in this very digital world? Could you explain a little bit how you approach the narrative process when using sequencing? So yes, contact sheets, obviously, Arthur, you're still looking at contact sheets, yes.
Well, one of the interesting aspects of the digital age is blur books. You can make your own photo book in a couple of hours. I mean, that's the great liberation of the iMac. So one becomes re-involved with the idea of sequencing. Certainly in film you have that, but one can do a book of just one's day's experiences. So I think that's become very relevant.
We have one question for you, Arthur, about have you written down your dreams for your own analysis and to inspire your images?
Well, when I was working on the book Dream Collector, I read a lot of books about dream theory, Jung, dreams of tribal people, dreams of Franz Kafka, but I would also write down my own dreams, and I would pull out picture ideas. I would call them PIs in my notebooks. And I don't, again, it was a way of opening up my own idea, opening up my own mind to liberate what my imagination is able to pull out of myself. Some extraordinary things, but not really anymore. I've moved. It's already inside all my head already.
Dwayne, somebody, Ken Light, actually, not just somebody, but Ken Light and Margie Ornston have both asked, what is that behind you, Dwayne?
Oh, that's interesting. I did a portrait of somebody and I made these props for his portrait, but we never used them really. So I said last week, let's make a Martian movie. So we made a movie about Martians coming. It's my first science fiction movie, and it'll be out this week. Probably tomorrow we're going to put it out, and I just love it. And I noticed that Arthur's wearing a T-shirt by accident that matches my Martians. So
There's no accident, Blaine.
I think that's, I think he's given away, he's really a Martian, and he can't help himself when he saw the Martians put on his Martian. I just think, see, don't let him look you in the eye either. It's very scary. But one last comment about the camera thing. I'm not wedded to the camera, and I'm quite happy to move on. I love digital. What the camera should be invisible, and nothing should get in the way of taking the picture. And so Arthur's great facility, and he's done it so long. I haven't taken a picture with a camera in a long time, and I'm completely enthralled with the digital. I may marry a digital one of these days before I die, and we'll have to go to the digital divorce court. But I don't show, and I truly the digital because it's invisible. I don't have to think about it. Woo!
So somebody's asking where we can see the movies. So they're all on your Vimeo. You have a Vimeo page. So we'll try to share that link, or you can Google Dwayne Michaels Vimeo, and you can see all of Dwayne's films.
Well, may I interject?
Yeah.
Arthur was originally going to be a filmmaker way back when he was 20 years old, and made a couple of self-taught student films, I guess, that are on YouTube or Vimeo.
We have
And
see those.
doing multiple exposures.
Oh, they're
I
wild.
even did my own music for them. But
Wow,
but I felt that I just felt that I just love still photography. So in a way, I've gone the reverse course of Dwayne.
Yeah.
But
I can't wait to see your movies. I really can. That's very
Oh.
exciting.
yes.
Great.
What are they called?
Oh,
Daymares?
Daymares, World's Fair, Gardens of Tivoli. Couple
Wow.
very interesting. There's still more to do.
I'm applauding in advance.
All right, thank you.
We're sort of, we've run quite a bit over, and I don't want to take any more of your time today. We could go on for hours.
Okay,
I
next.
really want to thank
Thank
you
you.
both for joining
Yes.
us, and it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Dwayne, for joining us all the way from New York.
Okay.
And Arthur.
Thank you.
And again, the exhibition of Arthur's work at the Getty Center is on view until February 18th. So please come and see it. We have a wonderful book, and hope to see you all up at the Getty. And thanks for
Yay.
joining.